right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Truthcast Show. Hope everyone's doing well and staying cool out there for the most part. It's only about 900 degrees. Not a drop of moisture in the air, other than yesterday evening. So, thank God for that one. We're gonna do something a little different this time. It's been 4 or 5 weeks since the last episode, and so we're gonna do something a little bit different this time. I'm actually going to go more into the psychological aspects of things. We're going to be doing an overview of the brain. We're going to be taking a look at IQ and what it means, and also delve into a little bit of the potentials of human consciousness and what that may be. So, made a few changes as well to the presentation piece, so that should help, I do believe. And we'll also integrate a little bit of Christian theology and philosophy in there as well as we go along. So we'll go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Dear Lord God, Jesus Christ, thank you for this time together, Lord. Continue to bless us, be with us, strengthen us. And please, Lord, bring some cool weather and some more rain to us as we continue to dry up. And please, Lord, bless this study tonight and help us to continue to grow and in the knowledge that you've given us, and to also come closer to you and to understand how this information that we're speaking about tonight correlates with your word, Lord. Thank you for all things. In your great name, pray, Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so just give it a second here. Let me get back over to the comments. Oh, yeah. Feel free to comment as well as like and share. Like I said, this is going to be a little different. We're going to really kind of go into more of, I would say, lecture style of teaching, as I have done in the past, but just slightly different than before. And hopefully you'll enjoy. We're going to go more into the psychological aspect rather than on the theological side. And I'm going to, I plan on continuing to do the show once a month at this moment, and maybe even expanding on that a little bit more as well by doing it a couple of times a month, bi-weekly once again. And I've already thought about the next episode of doing some personality, understanding personality, and we'll also graft in some other things of physics and evolution and as always, Christian theology and philosophy, and as well as other philosophies and ideas and studies. So help us continue to enhance our knowledge and grow, not only in the Word of God, but also in the things that He has created. So that should help at the end. Okay, so let's get in here. Let me get this to full. Oh, I'm not sure why it went over there. It should be going over here, I thought. Okay, now that's a little. Oh, wait. Hang on here right quick. I'm trying to figure out why exactly that just happened. Let me get back onto the screen here. I guess maybe I can't blow it up. It only does it. There we go. I'm not sure exactly why it won't. As soon as I put it into the slide formation, it won't do it on there. Hey, Alan, thank you for joining. So we're going to look at the brain, IQ, and human consciousness. The brain is very fascinating. Its anatomy and functionality. And IQ itself is also very fascinating. It's very, as well as very controversial on many different levels of analysis. People tend to get very frustrated and offended, especially nowadays, with the ideas of IQ on both the left and right political spectrum, I would say. It's a frustrating, controversial topic, but it's also very, very fascinating as well. And once you begin to better understand it, it makes more sense. And and to understand how that, along with personality and interest, could actually help um, improve the situations of people as with their occupations and their home lives and their community and the like. Actually starts making it more appealing over time. So, and I'm going to correlate this as well with scripture later on with the ideas of differences within the Christian church that Paul exclaimed, and how we're not all the same, and there are differences of personality, IQ levels, and that it could actually be if we don't shun it away and rather expound on those differences, we could actually make things the church function as a whole in a much more, I would say, functional way. So, um, and it would make a greater difference in society rather than thinking everybody is exactly the same. And I spoke with so many people, even older people as well, that believe that Christianity is the same for every single person as far as their duties, I would say, and their ministry. Everybody should do exactly the same thing, and yet that's not what Paul teaches whatsoever. He teaches that not all are the hand or the foot; that we're all different, have different approaches within the ministry that are tailored towards us, and that's in a more modern sense, especially with modern technology and advancements in science. We're understanding, we're better understanding those differences on a deeper level than ever before. But so, okay. Hey, Kim, thank you for joining. I appreciate it. Okay, so this right here is a distribution of IQ. I'm trying to remember if I don't think I put it on there, so we'll have to kind of go back that once we really get into IQ. But that's what's called, what you're seeing there is the normal distribution of IQ. What's called the bell curve, and you have on the lower, you can kind of see the mouse there, and the lower end of the spectrum of IQ, and then you see the vast majority of people as you go into the more middle portions, and then as you get to the top, it begins to get slimmer and slimmer, narrow and narrow as well. So you have different percentiles, the vast majority being in between 85 and 115 of IQ scores. And then as you get above 115, especially once you get above 130, you begin into the 98 percentile area. You start getting very high up in there, in the top 98%, not the percentile, but the top 98%. Well, no, it's 98 percentile, excuse me. They're about. Anyway, okay. So this is the brain. From looking at it from the top down, from the brain stem here on up, it's triune brain. There's 3 different layers. Of course, they all kind of interconnect, but it evolved sort of in this pattern where you have the what's called they call it the reptilian brain. But a more technical term, this is the hind brain. And you have the limbic brain, limbic system, but it's also called the midbrain, and then the neocortex, which is the top layer, which is actually the largest layer of the human brain, right around making up about 80% of our brains and of the total volume. And that's also called the forebrain. And so you have 3 different layers, each with, so the reptilian brain or the hind brain developed around 500 million years ago. The limbic brain about 200 million years ago, and is present. It's also called the mammalian brain. It's present in all mammals. And then the forebrain here really began to develop sophisticately around about 100 million years ago, and has a heavy presence in chimpanzees, which are near ancestors, and that's where we start seeing this is where the critical thought, executive functions are housed, as well as certain emotions as well. But it's all fairly well interconnected, but they're different processes, functions that go along with them that we're about to look at here. So, okay. Let me see. Yep. All right. Brain anatomy and function. Hopefully you can see this. I wish I could blow it up a little bigger, but for whatever reason, it won't allow me to do that. It just popped up on the other screen. Okay, so in the brain anatomy, you got top view and the bottom view down here, and you also have side views. And this is inside the brain, and this is on the outer of the forebrain itself. And so you can see here on the representation, these are some of the various components of the hindbrain, and then here's the midbrain, the small little area here, and then you have the forebrain on top. And so you can see on the human side that much of our brains is composed of the forebrain itself. So we'll go into some of the functions here. There's pretty much 17 different parts, and I believe this actually has all of them for the most part. This may have, yeah, for the most part, it's got 14. So, okay. So let's start with the brain stem here. You got the brain stem. This is a little bit different map than what I actually have. It does not show. Yeah, this shows a little different. I did not realize that. But we'll go ahead and go with it anyways. So we got the brain stem. And believe me, this all leads up to the IQ. We're going to look at the different hemispheres here shortly and how, yeah, we'll just go along with it. So do bear with me. Some of them, I'm sure, may be a little boring, but we'll do our best here. Then you have the brain stem right in this area, which is part of that hind brain that we're talking about, the reptilian brain. And it's a regulatory function. It's you have the midbrain right here that's really kind of composed of this midbrain area. You have what's called pons in there, and the medulla oblongata. For those that actually watch The Waterboy, know kind of what I'm talking about, and it's kind of funny. And it deals with breathing, controls breathing, circulation, as well as digestion. It also sends sensory information up into the parietal lobe up here that we'll get into here shortly as well. Or yeah, the parietal, I believe it's the parietal lobe. Let me see. Yes. My gosh. Yes, the parietal lobe. Yeah, yes, the parietal, yes, inside the parietal lobe, sorry. The parietal lobe, and it sends, and then also motor neurons send information to the rest of the body through there as well. And then we have the cerebellum, which is back here, and that deals with a lot of balance and body movement, body control, motion memory is all housed in that area. A very important area, of course. We have the thalamus, which it doesn't actually show it really in detail here, but it's up into the midbrain area, and it's helps sort data. And you have the hypothalamus, which is also helps the body maintain homeostasis, and the posterior pituitary. I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but anyways, it helps release proper hormones like oxytocin. And then we have the cerebrum. Sorry, I'm trying to read some of this stuff, which is the top layer up here as well, the forebrain cerebrum, and billions of neurons. That's where gray matter and white matter are. That's where it's housed. It's the integration of information, and then in between the two hemispheres, which we'll get into the two hemispheres here shortly. A very interesting study, and it's in between the hemispheres, the corpus callosum, and it helps transfer information, but it's also inhibitory. Inhibits certain information going, especially into the left hemisphere, and so that's kind of a crucial aspect of integration of information from the right hemisphere into the left, and the left, the corpus callosum, does its best to keep too much information from coming in. And so we'll get into that here shortly. It's kind of an interesting concept, especially off the work of Ian McGilchrist. And so, Kai, thank you for joining. This is when I crashed my bike too. Then I had brain damage. I can't smell or taste since then. What part of the brain controls that? Pardon me. That is the that would Well, some of the smell and stuff is in the temporal lobe, but also in the parietal lobe as well. So this on the side of the brains here. You can see part of, I don't know how well you can actually see, like I said, because of, I wish I can actually zoom this. Maybe, well, it's not allowing me to go any higher than that. Okay. All right. Wonder if I get rid of that, if that blows it up a little bit more. Not do much, but a little bit. Okay. So yeah, you had the parietal lobe in here, as well as the temporal lobes. They're kind of intermeshed together for the most part, as far as what I can remember. There's a lot of information that's covered with the brain itself. And I was kind of scrambling with notes this evening to try to get everything put together in the mix of everything else we got going on. Okay, where were we here? Cerebral cortex. No, excuse me, sorry. Corpus callosum, that's where we're at. And then the basal ganglia. I'm trying to see if that's actually on here or not. That's just below the corpus callosum, which is not present in this particular photo. But that is a complex interaction of inhibition and excitatory response between neurons. It also helps control a lot of the motor control. People with Parkinson's disease has problems with the basal ganglia. And so that particular portion of the brain housed in between the hemispheres themselves underneath the corpus callosum. And then the cerebral cortex, which, as I said before, that's up on top here. Yeah, that's the top layer. You have the frontal lobe. So this is where we see right here, the frontal lobe. And then we have, here's cerebral cortex. You have the frontal lobe. I don't know why it's segmented like that. You have the parietal lobe, temporal lobes underneath the parietal lobe. The occipital lobe back here. So the occipital, so we'll start with the frontal lobe. That's where the executive functions, as well as when people have damages to the frontal lobe, they have strong emotional swings. I think that's where the radical left gets theirs. They probably have a bunch of damage to that prefrontal cortex area. So the parietal is, again, a sensation dealing with and reacting to environment. A lot of sensory input within the parietal lobe. Down below that, the temporal lobe. You have language, hearing, and memory housed in those areas. And then the occipital lobe, which deals with vision. Now, of course, much of the brain itself, although they are segmented in these pictures, a lot of different areas actually interconnect with each other. As I was even saying, on the certain levels between the triune brain, the three different parts of the evolved brain, it's the same thing with these. It's not necessarily that those particular things are housed within only those areas, or actually show up in other areas, but to help simplify and narrow things down to make it easier for categorization purposes and to understand functionality, they narrow them down into those areas. Those are the particular areas where they show the most activity, but they also show other activities in other areas. And they can understand this more so because of functional MRI scans. They can actually see what happens when certain activities are going on with an individual that light up certain areas of the brain. That's where they can actually see, connect the different functionalities of those different parts of the brain. So, I think, okay. So yeah, we have the different functions. And it's good just to understand the brain and the functionality of the brain, and to understand, what's going on with your brain, to say the very least. Now I got to figure out exactly how do I get this thing to switch over. Oh no, okay, here we go. I think there we go. Okay, before we actually go on to that, before we go into IQ itself, it's a very interesting part of all this. And so, yeah, I do okay there, Kai. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm pretty sure it's late over there. So, yeah, have a good night. And, hopefully talk to you here soon. It's been a while, that's for sure. So thank you for tuning in there. Again, I'll just go back up to the brain right quick to talk about that before we begin into the IQ, the dual hemispheres. As I said before, with that coming from neuropsychologist Ian McGilchrist, He has a book called, he has a few different books, but one of them is The Master and His Emissary, and it deals with the functionalities of the right and left hemisphere and how important they really are. And we have been taught for so long that the right hemisphere deals with creativity, which it does to a certain extent, and the left hemisphere is more analytical or logical. And it is only to a certain extent, but he delves further into this, that drinking these energy drinks give you a little bit of gas, unfortunately. He delves a little bit further into this, and I believe I've spoken about this on the show before, that the importance, most people end up relying too heavily on the left hemisphere, and they believe that that's some rational part. And there's been experiments that have been conducted to show that really, to a certain degree, the most important hemisphere would be the right. It's the more dominant of the hemispheres, should be the kind of more dominant of the hemispheres. And you can watch different interviews with him and stuff. It's very fascinating work that he does. He was saying that the left hemisphere takes things out of context. It works to take things out of context, while the right hemisphere sees the whole of context. And he says, as we have become more modernized in our society, we have become more left hemisphere dominant, and we're taking things out of context, which whenever you actually sit there and think about the what's happening in our society today, especially on the left, but even on the right themselves, is that we're taking things out of context at extraordinarily deep levels. You see that in the Christian church. You see that in the political realm, especially in the Christian church, taking things out of context in interpretations of certain verses, rather than looking at things in the whole of its context of where it originates, and then looking at the whole of that context of the Bible itself to understand what's actually happening, what's going on, to better understand the verse, as well as the other components that go along with that, including the original language it was written in and the time that it was written in, certain aspects as such. So he was saying that the left hemisphere, so they've conducted experiments where they have put these electromagnetic, I'm trying to think of the word real quick, the electromagnetic, or their electric current, trying to think right quick of what the word I'm trying to get here. Experiments where they shut certain hemispheres off within the brain. They were able to shut the right hemisphere off and have the left hemisphere go on. They were able to shut the left hemisphere off, only had the right, and then they had both of them. And whenever they did the experiments by shutting the left hemisphere off or having both hemispheres go on at the same time, they had these tests, and it was logic tests. They were simple phrases. It said, the question was, if it said that in tropical islands, the winters are cold. Hawaii is a tropical island. Therefore, winters in Hawaii are cold. And whenever the left hemisphere was shut off, people answered and said, well, that can't be true because tropical islands, the winters aren't cold. And the same thing if they had both the right and left hemisphere functioning together. But as soon as they dampened the right hemisphere functions and they had the left hemisphere go on by itself, the left hemisphere said, well, that is true because it logically follows that, winters are cold. It only knows systematic order, A, B, C, whether it's actually true or not, doesn't matter. It's a logical order, but it's not necessarily logic itself. And it was showing examples that people in indigenous tribes throughout the world are able to better relate with this. They did some tribes in Siberia, or no, it wasn't Siberia. It was somewhere close by Siberia. It was somewhere in Russia. I can't remember exactly where. Indigenous tribes in Russia, and they asked the tribe. It said, the following order of logic, that bears in cold climates are white. All bears are white, and therefore bears in Siberia, all bears in Siberia are white because it's cold in Siberia. And they responded, well, I don't know that because I've never been there. I've never seen it for myself. I've never actually experienced bears in Siberia, so I have no clue. And so they actually knew how to follow proper logic. That actually is not necessarily true, although it's in logical order doesn't mean that it's actually true. And so the right hemisphere takes things within its context rather than just looking at the parts. And it's very fascinating. And what the left hemisphere does, unfortunately, is that it takes things, information, and stores it within the left hemisphere. And then it creates knowledge structures. And as we have in our modern day society, as we become more left hemisphere dominant, we enforce these knowledge structures, these frameworks onto the world. And the very interesting thing to really help kind of clarify this is the fact that he said the difference on the creative side of things within the hemispheres is that the right hemisphere is predicated upon imagination and that of dreams, while the left hemisphere is that of fantasy. And so what fantasy is coming up with creative ideas that are not embedded within reality, while imagination is coming up with true creative means of producing something of value, you would say, and or allowing thoughts to come up themselves like we do in dreams, allowing dreams to come forth and not trying to control the imaginative process. And that's what the right hemisphere does. It doesn't seek to control it. It allows it to flow. That's why, and that's one of the issues too, that I believe whenever Christ was saying to become childlike, I think is, well, in part, it's also an interpretation of a meaning of humbling ourselves, but it's also that of being open to new information, which is also a process of humbling ourselves. And it's fascinating because children, when they're young, they're actually very right hemisphere dominant, and they're able to soak up information much more than we are, because we start building in these frameworks within our left hemispheres, and then that's how we live and act out in the world. While they're fresh and they're able to graft in more information than what we are, and if we open ourselves up more and seek to see how that new information fits into the framework, rather than just blocking it out. As I said before, the corpus callosum, the bridge in between the right and left hemisphere, is inhibitory. Most of the neurons are inhibitory, so it tries to keep most of that information that comes into the right hemisphere out. But if we do our best by critically thinking, learning something new, then critically thinking on that, see how it fits into our current knowledge structure that we have built, we'll do it much better than we would if we just ignore the information or not learn at all. And see, I think that's also what has happened nowadays in modern day society, especially among younger generations, my generation included, is the fact that we're no longer open to new ideas whatsoever. We have constructed frameworks. We're unwilling to learn anything. No one reads anymore. So we have these frameworks in which we have built whatever the media has sold us and taught us. And we move about in the world like that without grafting in anything else. And the left hemisphere, not only does it build the framework, but it's also certain in what it knows, while the right hemisphere is more akin to uncertainty. And so it's a humbling aspect to it. And so the more we're able to view the world without imposing structures upon it, doing our best to do so, will help us to ultimately graft in more information and then critically think and see how that information fits in the world. But what's interesting about the fantasy idea is, so what people do oftentimes is build up these fantasies within their brains, like within the hemisphere, and then seek to impose that fantasy on the world. That's what we see on the left, especially the coming utopian society, imposing the structure onto the world. And this is how the world should operate, irregardless of whatever outside evidence may go against that. This is the way it should be, and we can go ahead and create that. And it's like, no, you'll never create it. It's a false narrative that you're believing in. And until you come to realize that, you're going to continue to be destructive rather than constructive in society. And so, but that takes a lot of humbling. But when they're, and that's the problem too, is the fact that narcissism has rose tremendously over the past 3 decades. They've done studies among college students where back in the late, I believe it was mid to late 80s, average college students ranged on the scale of about 30% empathetic and 70 to 80% empathetic and about 20 to 30% narcissistic. And now that score has completely flip-flopped within 3 decades to where the average college student, undergraduate student, is about 70 to 80% narcissistic and 20 to 30% empathetic. So if that tells you anything, and when you're like that, you're full of certainty, which also again correlates with a left hemisphere dominant worldview. And so, dual hemispheres. And what's interesting too about the dual hemisphere idea is the fact that the hemispheres on chimpanzees are more solidly fit together. There's not as much gap in between the two, but in the human brain, that gap is substantially wider in between the hemispheres, and the corpus callosum is much narrower compared to that of chimpanzees. So the evolutionary pathway, in conjunction with the evolution of intelligence, has for some reason that makes it, I guess, more efficient. They're not really certain exactly to why that is the case, but that is what has happened. Okay, let's see here. And yeah, so, okay. Trying to think right quick what else we can do with before we get into the actual IQ study here. Trying to look through some of my notes to see what else we can't do. Well, I mean, an interesting side note as well is the fact that I've spoke about it before. It's that of testosterone levels. Testosterone levels have lowered substantially over the past 30 or 40 years, and this actually is right along in conjunction with the lower rates of IQ. Over the past 20, 30 years, IQ levels in America specifically are declining. And this, interestingly enough, this is also correlated to a certain extent. It has an association with the decline in Christian belief. The decline began around 2000, especially. It was about 70%, where it's maintained 70% or higher ever since they began surveying the American public, beginning back in, I believe it was about 1910 or 1920. And now there's a sharp decline. We're at about 48% on the most recent survey they conducted of people claiming Christians. And each subsequent younger generation is less and less religious. And so it's pretty interesting. You would think, oh yeah, people are getting smarter, so they get less religious or something. No, they're actually getting dumber. And so it's having the opposite effect of what people would think, especially on the atheistic side of things. So very interesting how that works. But anyways, on the evolutionary side, one interesting note is the fact that, and I've said it before, maybe not on this show, but the lower testosterone, to a certain degree, too high of testosterone is correlated with lower IQ, and too low of testosterone is correlated with lower IQ. There's this weird homeostasis notion with our body and brain connection that's going on there that keeps IQ and testosterone levels, at least those two variables, at bay. If you have so men that are generally too high of testosterone, as I said, or lower, have generally lower IQ. men that are too low at testosterone, the same thing, but those with normal testosterone levels are right at where they need to be. And so what's interesting, you see that correlated within the lower testosterone that I mentioned a while ago in the last 30 to 40 years. But you see this even in evolution. So testosterone played a role. We saw drastic drop in testosterone among humans, Homo sapiens. I forgot exactly when it was, but I think it was somewhere around 100,000 years ago. We began to really advance and our testosterone levels began to drop. And of course, testosterone levels prior to that time were substantially higher than what ours is today, even the strongest, bulkiest of men. And as you go further back, they're higher and higher and higher. So we actually have dropped, and that was in correlation with higher IQ. So there is this strength even on a grander scale within the human evolutionary standpoint. And of course, I'm speaking mostly of males, but even on females, if female testosterone levels are too high or too low within a female standard of testosterone, because females have testosterone as well. If they're too high or too low, it's the same thing. There's a strength equilibrium that has to be maintained in order for correct functionality of both body and brain, and to be maintained, and for a person to excel in life, I would say. But even on a grander scale of looking at the total of human evolution, as we advance in intelligence, our testosterone levels began to decrease, and our body sizes began to decrease. Our heads began to enlarge to a certain degree, and there's this kind of, we came to this point of like an ideal form of what the most sustainable form of a human being within a higher intellect form, I would say, as well as physical and psychological, can maintain. And now I feel like we're going on the opposite end. So we went from a high end, we went to a ideal form within the past, let's say, 10 to 20,000 years. And then now we're going on the lower end of the spectrum. And Michael P. Masters, evolutionary anthropologist, does a wonderful work on correlating some of this data, not entirely all the data I mentioned, but some of it with the idea, and you can do research yourself. It's a very fascinating book nonetheless, the idea that if gray aliens are real, that perhaps they're us from the future coming back. And he was saying that if you look at the current trends, even among testosterone levels, especially among males, we're getting smaller and we're getting frailer, and we're beginning, over time, we will develop and look more and more gray-like, and we'll look small and frail in the vast majority of cases that have been reported from abduction stories, if they're true. Generally identify gray aliens about, in between 4 and 5 feet tall, and very, very frail, thin individuals. And so, and as far as we can tell, most of what maintains them is technology. And that's what we see even, especially with today, as we continue to progress with AI systems. So that's for another time. But anyways, and Alan says, what do you feel has prevented chimp brains from developing as fast as human brains? Well, chimp brains did develop. We branched off from chimps about 6 million years ago. And so what distinguished us from them is, one thing, we began to walk upright, bipedal. And then from there, that helped. It's a lot going into it, and I'm not an evolutionary anthropologist, but what it did to our brains and our bodies, it completely changed the dynamics of our brains and bodies once we began to walk upright. And then it was all, uphill or downhill from there, however you want to look at it. But our heads, as we walked upright, see, chimps are looking forward with their necks bent, looking upward, and so their brains could only be a certain size. When we began to walk upright, what happened is our heads tilted forward. It allowed our brains to grow larger, and that formed more of that the forebrain on top to grow larger itself, especially within the prefrontal cortex region where the executive functions are housed. And so it allowed intelligence to increase over time. That was one marker of it. with bipedalism, and it changed. It also slowly but surely dropped our larynx down to where we are able to begin to start speaking slowly but surely over time, and that also helped increase brain size. And then we began to use fire to cook meat, and around 2 million years ago, and we were using stone. We began to use stone tools around 3 million years ago. All those began to change our brain anatomy and brain functions in and of themselves and expand our brain, especially within that prefrontal cortex area. And it continuously made us smarter as time went on, especially with that of the introduction of fire and cooking meat. That was one of the big things. I forgot his name. I actually might have it right here. Trying to remember. Just give me a second. I can actually find what his name is. Does a wonderful deal. He has a book called Catching Fire. And he's an anthropologist, primatologist, really, but he's also does anthropology work, human evolution. Richard Wrangham. It's called Catching Fire. Very fascinating book. He did work where he was showing, so chimps and gorillas and things of that nature eat raw meat and eat leaves and things. And chimps generally spend about 6 hours a day chewing the meat because it's very tough. Raw meat is very tough. And what we have developed as humans after walking bipedal, we began walking bipedal around about 6 million years ago. And that's what helped us branch from chimpanzees. One of our ancestors began doing it, and it went from there. But and then we started using stone tools. We began to learn to do that, about 3 million years later. And about 1 million years after that, we began to use fire to cook meat. And what fire did to meat once we cooked it is it softened it up. And we went from chewing for about 6 hours to about only an hour a day. So it freed us up to do more things and to build more tools. And that only increased our brain size. At least that's what the theory implies, is that our brains began to grow larger because we have more time on our hands to be able to do more things. And what's so fascinating is as creatures today, especially with the ample amounts of information that we have on the internet, we have ample books. The vast majority of the population is literate now. We have much more free time than we ever had, to a certain extent, compared to let's say, compared to back about 150 years or earlier ago. People are still trying to survive for the most part. We have a lot of leisure time on our hands. We should be studying. We should be getting smarter as a species, and we're not at all. We're actually declining because now we're using technology to our advantage for instant gratification and the process of stimulation of the dopaminergic system, which is not doing us any good whatsoever. And so, we're destroying ourselves rather than utilizing the tools that we have at our disposal. That's what we should be doing. And that's what our ancestors did, technically speaking. Once they began to use tools, those were, in some aspects, that was the very first form of the iPhone. And that was the first form of any type of technology, was stone tools. And they began to fashion those about 3 million years. And that's what really helped grow our brains. And we went on from there. And we should be still using things as tools, but now we don't use them as tools. Or I would say we use them as tools, but tools for pleasure rather than tools for growth. And feeding our brains and trying to learn. And it's wild. It's absolutely wild. That's for another time as well. But so we'll go into the next part. And hopefully that explains some of that on that end. Hopefully I explained it all right. So understanding IQ. So now we're finally into IQ. If you want to do research, in-depth research on IQ, I highly recommend Richard Hare. He's actually one of the leading experts in the world on IQ. He's been on, there's several different podcasts and stuff he's been on. I went through his course before. Very interesting stuff about IQ itself. And he's been doing research on IQ for 30, 40 years. So very in tune, in depth with that on that end. So now IQ is slightly different from the term of intelligence. Intelligence is just more of a broad term. Most people, people most often use. IQ itself is it measures the overall intelligence. So this is, I'm going to do my best, because I'm not necessarily an expert, but I'm going to do my best to help break this down the best that I can. You have various different dimensions of intelligence. So we have the dimensions here. You have crystallized intelligence, that's comprehensive knowledge, that's facts that and the such. You have fluid intelligence, which is reasoning abilities and problem solving. So using that comprehensive knowledge that you gather, and then being able to utilize it and analyze it and use it for problem solving. Visual spatial intelligence, with the ability to visually manipulate objects, be able to visualize within your head 3D objects and things of that nature. And that is actually the only area on gender difference within IQ. That is actually the only difference among in between male and female IQ, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, that's the only difference within the dimensions of IQ is visual spatial intelligence. Female generally scores slightly lower, and that's also could be a reason behind why men are more interested in things while women are more interested in people. And that's why you see a lot of women go into nursing fields and a lot of men go into engineering fields. Now, I've read so many different cockamamie things within textbooks, especially here recently with some of the schooling I've done, noting that it's socially constructed, and that's the only reason in and of itself. And that's absolutely reprehensible, because, I mean, whenever you do a factor analysis on something, you look at it's multivariable. You look at all the different variables at play. Well, they just univariable the analysis and go, well, that's just predicated upon, gender stereotype and male dominance and the patriarchy and things. It's just, first off, it's not proper education to begin with. That's just dogma. That's just propaganda. Another thing is you never take something and look at it through a univariable lens. Again, that would be a left hemisphere dominant trait. That would be taking things out of context and, okay, well, it's attributed to this, rather than looking at the whole of the context going, well, no, there's a lot of different variables at play. And if you look over the course of human evolution, 6 million years, and the way men and women had to dialogue and work together to be able to survive and stuff for all those millions of years, and to predicate everything upon a society as being patriarchy, and society's only been around for maybe 6,000 years total. It's like, come on, man. Compared to 6 million years of human evolution, it doesn't make any sense. So don't take things out of context. Look at the whole of the context and try to figure out all the different variables at play. But now, and you're talking university textbooks, this is what being taught, that all men are racist and toxic and everything else under the sun. So it's absolutely ridiculous. But anyways, so you have processing speed and speed of cognitive processes, working memory, ability to form and store new information. So these are the various different dimensions of IQ, and this is what IQ tests ultimately examine and test for, are these different dimensions. Now, some have come out with different work trying to prove that IQ itself is segmented into the different dimensions, that some are higher in this area and some are higher in that area, and different things, and that there is no such thing as a general IQ factor, which is called the G factor in IQ. But so far that's been disproved multiple times over. There's a wealth, thousands and thousands of studies conducted by various different groups that show that no matter how you manipulate these dimensions, and all those dimensions correlate to what's called the G factor, the general intelligence factor. Now, IQ doesn't necessarily, there's some things missing from IQ tests, of course. It can only do so much, but it gives you an estimate of the number. It gives you a number, and it's an estimate of that G factor, the general intelligence factor, to help kind of show where a person would be at in correlation with the rest of the population. And so, and what happens is now some people may score slightly higher on one dimension than another. But overall, it takes that general score and takes it down into the G factor. It funnels it down to the G factor, and it comes out with that overall score, the overall general intelligence factor. And what's interesting about intelligence, and I try to help explain this to people as best as I can, is it has a derogatory element to it. It has a discriminatory element to it, of course. Any kind of truth has the discriminatory element to it to begin with. Even in the biblical context, if you don't believe in Christ, you can't get in, you can't come to the Father. There's always a discriminatory element to something that's exclusive. But overall, and we'll get into that here shortly, with utilizing IQ and personality and interests and temperament and stuff to be able to maximize the potential of any individual, irregardless of what their IQ scores may be at the end of the day, is crucial. And there are several different psychologists and companies and things of that nature that are actually pursuing that for the most part, if they haven't been already possessed by the radical left's agenda, making everything so equal on the outcome side, irregardless of what your potential is. Everybody has the same potential, the same intelligence, and that's the same thing I was trying to get at in the Christian church. Not everyone's ministry is supposed to be exactly the same. There are variations, and there's diversity, and that diversity, should help promote unification within the church, and it helps touch people that other people can't, touch necessarily. And we're supposed to all work together in unity. But even though there's those differences. Okay, well, let's look real quick back up at the IQ score dimension. I'm not sure exactly if you can see that. That's the only problem. I wonder if I can blow this up. I'm just going to go and blow it up right there, so you guys can kind of get a better picture. Like I said, again, you have the bell curve. That's what this curve is right here. So the vast majority fit within here, within the spectrum for the most part. So anywhere from 85 to 115, vast majority of people can do things for the most part. Now it gets really difficult when you're about 85 or below. Even 85 is pushing it on the IQ score. People have a hard time reading, following instructions, being able to write, being able to process information properly, to memorize anything. It's actually very difficult. I mean, even jobs at McDonald's now are not really even made for people that are of the lower end of the IQ spectrum, because it requires a lot of kind of tech savvy skills going on that they cannot actually, are not able to harness. So it's actually in some ways getting a little trickier, especially with the rise of technology and the complexities of technology itself. It's actually discriminatory against lower IQ individuals. And if I'm not mistaken, the stats on people that have an IQ score of 85 or lower is about 51 million people in America. So you're talking about 51 million people that can't read properly or write properly, and that struggle with simple tasks. What do you do with those people exactly? Especially as technology keeps rising, it's actually excluding these individuals. And of course, the elites of the world have a perfect answer to that. We'll just give everyone universal income, have AI take over, and your life will just be peachy. I don't know how peachy that'll be. You'll own nothing and be happy about it. And so we'll just feed you like satiated apes, and you don't worry about it. We'll take good care of you. Okay, so yeah. And what's interesting about this bell curve is the fact that going into I would say conspiracy side of things a little bit, is the fact that Klaus Schwab himself has presented for the fourth industrial revolution that we're currently in, that the New World Order will bring about there'll no longer be a pyramid shape. It will actually be a diamond shaped economy where the vast majority of people will be in the middle. There'll be few on the low end, and then there'll be few at the high end, which is them, of course, that are on the high end. But you have the natural bell curve that he's depicting nonetheless. So But anyways, yeah. So that and like I said, the vast majority of people. So this is the average IQ is 100 itself, right here in the middle. So okay. Well, look, and what's no, of course, this may be a little discriminatory as well, but it is fact, and I'm not trying to be derogatory or discriminatory necessarily, but this is fact. So there are differences in IQ among ethnic groups, racial groups. Interestingly enough, Asians, and this is on average. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's uh, not really smart, black people or Hispanics or anything of that nature. But there are disparities within there. Discrepancies, I mean, rather. So you have Asians actually on average have the highest IQ. Then whites are second, and then you have Hispanics third, and then you have blacks on the lower end of the spectrum. And there's various different interpretations of why that is. But and what's interesting too, if you actually look at testosterone rates among ethnic groups, both Hispanics and blacks have higher testosterone rates than Asians or whites. So there's a bunch of different variables at play. Now, of course, the left automatically assumes something's wrong with society. Well, it's society that has been detrimental to them. It's like, no, this is millions of years of evolution at work here. Unfortunately, if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, I have to conduct more research on it. But for instance, on the black end of the spectrum, it could be that most of the people stayed behind, while higher IQ trait people, tracing back millions of years before there was any variations of skin color whatsoever, they even have done. I'm trying to remember exactly what the theory's name is now. I think it's the Savannah theory is what it's called, where people that are higher IQ, our chimp ancestors to a certain degree, about 3 or 4 million years ago, or maybe slightly earlier than that, the ones that left, I think maybe about 2 million years ago, we began to leave Africa and explore out. And the ones that were higher IQ were the ones that went out of Africa. And the reason being is because they sought out novelty, while the ones with lower IQ stayed back, wanting familiarity. And you see that is actually a common trait, which we'll get here in a second. That's the most interesting thing. That's one of the interesting things about IQ itself, that higher IQ within the 5 dimensions of personality traits, which is called the 5-factor personality trait. 5-factor personality. Anyway, 5-factor, big 5. You have trait conscientiousness, you have openness, you have agreeableness, and you have extroversion and neuroticism, negative emotion. Trait openness, which is that of openness to new experience, new information, creativity, all those are compacted in trait openness. That is the only personality trait that is correlated with IQ, that's associated with IQ. So the higher in IQ, the higher in trait openness. There's a positive correlation there. And then on this other side as well, the lower IQ, the lower in trait openness. So it's very interesting. And that's why, unfortunately, for like high-end ultra-conservative individuals, it's the same thing. But I would say also even on the high-end radical leftist side as well, so whether it's alt-right or alt-left, it's generally lower IQ people on those ends of the spectrum. And so because they're possessed by a certain ideological framework and are not open to anything, any new information or new experiences outside of that framework. And so that's been well documented. So that's the only personality trait that is associated with IQ. Interestingly enough, they've conducted tests with trait conscientiousness, with this orderliness and neatness and things of that nature. There's no correlation. That is a variable. Oftentimes, high IQ individuals are actually very disorderly. Not always, but oftentimes they're actually. That's why you see Einstein's desk and stuff. Famous pictures of scattered papers and things of that nature. And the reason for that, oftentimes, just a little side note here, is that higher IQ individuals are able to home in on what they're doing and to push out any distractions. And so they're able to push out anything on the peripheral side and be able to do extreme focus on something that they're really interested in. And so they'll have messy dust and not even pay attention to it. While another person that's high in trait conscientiousness, which is, like I said before, it's orderliness and will organize everything. And it bothers them so bad they can't stand it and they have to organize that. And so it's very interesting. That's not always the case. Like I said, I mean, there are high IQ people that are highly conscientious as well, but oftentimes, on average, there appears to be this association between high IQ and, to a certain degree, creativity, which messiness represents the aspects of external creativity. And so, but other than that, that's the only trait. You would think there would be other trait. Trait agreeableness seems to be somewhat associated as well with IQ to a certain degree, but there hasn't been very much data to verify that. That would be because that would be linked to a certain degree. That'd be linked with empathy and politeness. So high trait agreeableness may be somewhat associated with higher IQ as well, because oftentimes higher IQ people are very in tune with their emotions, but not always. So there's outliers to everything to various degrees. And so it just depends. It's an interesting study. Like I said, there's some discrimination and discrepancy going on there, but overall, it's very interesting. Okay, before we go there, real quick. Yeah, like I was saying before, the gender difference, there's not really any difference at all between scores, overall scores. There's just difference between the dimension of visual skills. The big difference between men and women appears to be within interest itself, being people and things. And so, and one of him, and of course, like I said, the radical left says, well, that's socially constructed, is what that is. And what's interesting is there's a wealth of studies by social science on the gender differences among the Scandinavian nations of Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And they're the most egalitarian type societies in the world as far as being the most egalitarian. And what they found is as you leave men and women alone, the greater differences they begin to show. So men become, there's more men that become engineers and more women that become nurses as time goes on. That's an example of occupation. And the difference begin to expand rather than narrow down. And the left, which is predominantly social scientists or leftists, we're expecting exactly the opposite. They're figuring that, the egalitarian societies, they're leaving men and women alone. They're not imposing this cultural structure on them, societal structure of gender differences, and so you should see the differences narrow down. Actually, went exactly the opposite. Now, why we're seeing the gender differences narrow down here is due strictly, as far as I can tell, in conjunction with the evidence that we see from Scandinavia, is the fact of ideological possession from the left within the indoctrination of children at young ages and so on, to push this emphasis on gender difference. If you just leave them alone, you see a greater difference, just like you would in Scandinavia, where it's egalitarian, the most egalitarian, way more than it is here in America. And that's what the leftists are saying that they're trying to create, is an egalitarian society. It's like, well, go ahead and look at Scandinavia and see what they're doing. And their differences are expanding, but you don't want to do that because you don't want the differences to get larger. You want them to narrow down. And so you have this ideological framework, again, the left hemisphere dominant perception. And you're trying to force that onto society. You're trying to force it onto the world and to make that come true. And that's not true science, first off, if you're trying to do it scientifically, like they say that they're doing. Science is you have this hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, and you don't really expect anything. You just, okay, well, let's see what happens, instead of trying to force the results to favor your hypothesis, and they're trying to favor the hypothesis to say, well, see, it's like this. It's like, well, no, actually the empirical data doesn't say that at all. So apparently you're wrong. Anyway, so as far also with the intelligence factor, what's very interesting too is the simple fact that there are no provable ways to increase, as far as they can tell, to increase the G factor, to increase overall intelligence. Now, you can do brain games, you can do different things to help increase specified areas, but overall, the G factor cannot be increased, but only maybe a few points if you're lucky. And even that can oftentimes, once you stop practicing certain things, that certain dimension or whatever you may have been practicing of the IQ will go back to its normal position. So it seems to be some type of biological underpinning that, biological aspect that is controlling the G factor itself. You're born with a certain G factor, a certain IQ level, and you're kind of stuck with that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean set in stone. They just haven't figured out a way to necessarily increase it. They're trying to figure out different ways, but it's something biological going on, which also, if you're learning, you're doing things, you're affecting the biological and neurological structure of your brain, of course. Of course, I'm about to get into a little bit of that. I know like I said, some of these shows I've been doing a little longer than what I normally have, so do bear with me. I hope you guys are enjoying this for the most part. So ways to improve brain function, at least. Maybe not necessarily increase IQ, but at least improve overall brain functionality. Learning new things is one. Exercising, of course, keeps your brain operating properly. Blood flowing, increasing blood flow to the brain, which helps be able to think clearer and improve memory. Socializing, same thing, very good. Brain games do help, then not necessarily with IQ, but overall the functionality of the brain. And diet and nutrition is a big one as well. I have a link in the description of the video. You can check it out if you want. It's a link to what's called Life Cycle. It's mushroom oil that I have been using here recently that helps. It's not psychedelic mushrooms or anything. It's just regular, various different mushrooms, including lion's mane and chaga and a few others, turkey tail and things of that nature. But it's full spectrum oil that you put in your drink that, or just take raw if you want, that gives you all the nutrients from mushrooms. And what's interesting is we evolved from fungi, 500, 600 million years ago. So it's kind of a part of our biology, and they've shown that, and I don't think this is on the website. I've seen on studies that consuming mushrooms like lion manes and chaga and things of that nature increase overall gray matter and white matter in the brain, which is the neuron brain cells in your brain. So that always helps. And certain other foods do as well. Green tea creates new neurons. Dark leafy greens. Meat's always good to having for your brain. Creatine is also another supplement that you can take. It's not just for building muscle. It's also essential for your brain function, believe it or not, and it improves memory. Ashwagandha, I believe I'm saying that right. Probably not saying that right, but anyways, that helps lower cortisol levels and improve testosterone among men, but it also helps improve memory as well. That's one. Eating blueberries, especially organic frozen blueberries, very important for the brain. Omega-3s, plenty of omega-3s, especially DHA from fish, very important, but even hemp seeds themselves, omega-3s, rich foods are very good. Eggs are especially good for your brain with choline in it, as well as omega-3s. And there's several different things you can research out there that you can find, but those are some references right there, some suggestions. And then new openness, as I said before, openness to not only new information, learning new things, but also new experiences themselves are very important. Whenever you learn new things or you experience new things, it actually rewires your brain and helps you perceive the world differently, which may or may not have an effect on overall IQ scores. But overall, it will help enhance brain connectivity. That's also, trying to do things with your opposite hand. That's a new experience in itself. Very easy new experience to try is eating with your non-dominant hand and brushing your teeth with non-dominant hand. I've been doing that for about 3 years, using my left hand to brush my teeth and eat with and things of that nature. It helps the overall connectivity within the brain. It helps rewire your brain, and it just changes your overall perception, which more than likely will help. And even new experiences as simple as watching new shows, new documentaries, learning something new, watching travel films. I mean, not even necessarily having to learn anything, even just seeing new scenery. If you can't necessarily travel, you can watch it virtually, and that also helps with new experiences. Meditation and fasting, of course, is very essential. Meditation and fasting is essentially what Christ was talking about whenever he ascended. I spoke about it on the show before about the idea of the transformation. Whenever he was transfigured, he descended immediately from there down, and his disciples were trying to cast out a demon, and they couldn't do it, and Christ did it. And they said, "How did you do that?" And he was saying, "Oh, you can do these and much greater miracles. You'll be able to say this mountain move from here to there." And most people know that those verses, with the faith of mustard seed. But what they leave out is the fact that he said this can only happen except through prayer and fasting, which prayer and meditation are essentially the same thing. It's the idea of quieting yourself before God. The difference is in the Christian context is focusing our attention on the one true God, and that is with Christ. And so compared to other philosophies like Buddhism and the such, but I think there's a lot of practicality within the meditative practices of Buddhism, even within during that time, the prayers of the Jews were oftentimes meditative. Most people don't know that, but that's actually what they did. They quieted themselves and sealed themselves and didn't think about things and focused their attention on God. And we should be carrying out the new experience. We should be carrying out those same type of practices with our focus on Christ, but truly quieting ourselves. Meditation, they've done multiple studies where meditation helps increase new neurons in your brain cells. It also rewires your brain. And of course, it also lowers anxiety and depression. There's multiple different things it does. But I think Christ, there's something there that he was referencing. I'm not sure exactly what it is just yet, but I think there's something important there going on that he was saying in order to be in touch with the divine realm that I think we're way out of sync on because we're so bombarded with, with unnecessary information from our cell phones, from our TVs, from everything in this world, emails and also social media and different things of that nature, that we're never able to truly quiet ourselves long enough in order to be in touch with that divine realm to see what the potentials and the activation of the potentials within ourselves. Fasting, the same thing. When we fast, we make ourselves more sensitive to that spiritual realm. Fasting has been shown to decrease cortisol levels, alleviate anxiety and depression. It also has been shown to rewire the brain as well as create new brain cells as well. Critical thinking and creativity exercises are a big one. You don't see that very often, but critical thinking, actually, whenever you learn something new, to take time, and this is also a meditative process. Meditation doesn't mean to just still yourself all the time. Meditation can be in the form of also taking time to think. That is also a trait of we'll get into here shortly, here in a minute. It's a trait of higher IQ individuals. People with higher IQ generally take more time to themselves. They prefer time to be in solitude, to be able to think and to think creatively and critically on different ideas that they have, that they formulated, new information they just gathered to see how it fits within their current perception of the world. And so it's good to take time to really critically think and not to distract ourselves continuously, and to really take it and be creative with that thinking and critical with that thinking. and even doing creative exercises themselves, doing something creative like art, learning a new instrument, learning a new language, things of that nature are very important with rewiring your brain and creating new neurons, brain cells within your brain. So those are just some different ways to improve overall brain function. So this, as I was saying before, signs of IQ. Daydreaming is one of them. Again, the creative thinking, taking time to be in solitude to really think of things, and creative thinking, that's all part of daydreaming. And it's also a part of trade, again, high in trade openness, high in creativity, high in seeking out new experiences and new information, learning new things, and having intellectual curiosity. Those are all part of high IQ. So you may not necessarily be able to increase the general intelligence factor, but you can at least seek to harness some of the same characteristics as those people. I think is very important. It can do nothing but benefit you at the end of the day. Having the intellectual curiosity, taking less time with TV and social media, more time with studies and just randomly researching something, and then whenever you start practicing, you put that in practice, another idea will come up and you'll find an association with that. Then you'll start researching that, and it can do nothing but benefit you at the end of the day. So dark humor is a sign of high intelligence as well. So those that have a dark sense of humor don't feel too bad, especially in the Christian realm, because you may be actually very smart. That's not to say that you should run away with it, but you should, it's definitely a characteristic thereof. So then certain mental illness aspects are actually associated with high IQ, especially that of anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder actually have different somewhat moderately associated with high IQ compared to the general population. Oddly enough, you would think that not to be the case, but several meta-analysis studies have come out to show that to be actually true. Again, solitude, like I was saying earlier, taking time to yourself, that's a sign of high IQ, wanting to be alone and to really think and to read and to understand. Being nocturnal, that is staying up late and kind of getting lesser sleep to a certain extent, is a higher IQ trait. Now, that doesn't improve IQ if you're not getting enough sleep. You need to make sure you get enough sleep, but overall, that is a characteristic trait of higher IQ, seeking to stay up late and sleep in for the most part, or not getting much sleep at all because your brain is hyperactive. There's actually a theory out with that on higher IQ end of the spectrum of hyperbrain, hyperbody. And it's very compelling and very interesting to learn about that. So you can do research on that, and we don't have as much time. So laziness is actually a high IQ trait among those individuals. Interestingly enough, most people think, high IQ, they're going to be, hard workers, highly conscientious. But like I was saying earlier, that's not necessarily true. And so they're actually oftentimes too smart for their own good, to say the least, and end up kind of not really wanting to push themselves because everything comes so easy, and they actually become bored with most of the stuff that challenges normal people is easy for them, and it becomes no longer stimulating whatsoever. And so it makes them lazy, and they'd rather do more stimulating activities and pursue those rather than going the normal route and conventional route of things. So and that's another thing as well. Thinking outside the box is another trait. The creative thinking, the trait openness, accepting confusion and vagueness. Oftentimes, really high IQ people generally will accept that they don't know. They will tell you straight up, I don't know, I'm not really sure. But maybe I'll go back and research that and we'll figure that out. It's oftentimes the lower end of the IQ spectrum that people are very certain. And of course, again, that goes with the left hemisphere dominant perception of the world. They're unwilling to accept the confusion. They need answers. They have to have the answers, which high IQ want the answers, but they're willing to accept that they don't. What lower IQ people do is they are not willing to accept the confusion and the answers as they increase in anxiety or whatever it may do. and instead they come up with cockamamie ideas and solutions, or well, it's like this, and they're very certain in their assertions. So again, curiosity and less aggressive. That goes along with the trait agreeableness factor that I was saying earlier within the big five model, a personality trait. So that's a sign of high IQ as well. Because they're able to control. That actually was one of the factors I was talking about earlier with the lower testosterone. As we continue to work together and communicate with each other within tribes, we began to cooperate more. And this actually lowered in effect, it lowered our testosterone over time, and it made us to become less aggressive, a little bit more agreeable, so we can actually cooperate properly without warring against each other. And what's interesting is there's actually less evidence of war during, back in the Neolithic and Paleolithic and prior to that time, compared to there was whenever the rise of civilization came in 4,000 BC, with the rise of Sumer and Egypt. Very interesting. You're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You would think we'd become more tamed, and we did to a certain extent, but in another aspect, we became more tyrannical at the same time with the emergence of civilization. So very fascinating. We sought out more land while the tribal groups did not really do that. That's why, so anyway, that's for another time. Very interesting. Okay, so now we're finally at human conscience. I hope you guys are still with me here. I do appreciate you guys staying tuned. And so human consciousness, we have no really earthly idea what human consciousness is. Now, I've spoke with different people about it. I've heard different explanations about it. Well, human consciousness is that of higher brain order, and it's and that may be true to a certain degree. And you can see consciousness at play within MRI scans, but still we don't know the essence, and we don't know the origin of what consciousness actually is. So this is an interesting study that has come out from research conducted in Dublin, Ireland, stating that our brains use quantum computation in order to produce consciousness. And quantum computation is very complex, as the name implies. It's a very complex process. Quantum computation is so much more complex than our most sophisticated supercomputers we have available today, by far. It's so far advanced, it's light years ahead of any major supercomputer that we have in our possession today. Someone used an example, a computer expert used an example that a complex equation that would take a supercomputer billions of years to calculate would take a quantum computer about a weekend. So if that tells you anything of how they're not even the top leading experts in AI and the technological fields are not even sure what quantum computation is going to accomplish in quantum computers in themselves. And so they think that the process is because our brains function so much more efficiently and are much more sophisticated than any supercomputer, that perhaps they run off of quantum computation at the end of the day. Here's the excerpt from the deal. It says, scientists from Trinity College, Dublin, believe our brains could use quantum computation. Their discovery comes after they adapted an idea developed to prove the existence of quantum gravity to explore the human brain and its working. The brain functions measured were also correlated to short-term memory performance and conscious awareness, suggesting quantum processes are also part of cognitive and conscious brain functions. If the team's results can be confirmed, likely requiring advanced multidisciplinary approaches, they would enhance our general understanding of how the brain works and potentially how it can be maintained or even healed. They may also find innovative technologies and build even more advanced quantum computers. Now, in relationship to the image of the beast that I have referenced before in the book of Revelation, the image of the beast is given consciousness, and I believe that to be that of a AI system. Well, they're trying to perfect the quantum computer. They have prototypes out. Almost every single major tech company has a prototype quantum computer, but none have perfected it just yet. And they believe they're probably anywhere from 5 to 15 or so years away from perfecting a quantum computer. When they do that, I believe, if this is true, that our brains are using quantum computation to be able to produce consciousness, if that's the underlying instruction of the functionality of an origin of consciousness, then that would mean that a quantum computer AI system will generate a conscious AI system. So this is very interesting, and it correlates right with what is predicted in the book of Revelation. It says Dr. Kristen Kirkson, lead physicist at the Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience, is the co-author of the research article that has just been published in Journal of Physics Communications. He said, we adapted an idea, developed 4 experiments to prove the existence of quantum gravity, whereby you take known quantum systems which interact with an unknown system. If the known systems entangle, then the unknown must be a quantum system too. It circumvents the difficulties to find measuring devices for something we know nothing about. For experiments, we use proton spins and brain water as the known system. Brain water builds up naturally as fluid in our brains, and the proton spins can be measured using MRI. Then by using a specific MRI designed to seek entangled spins, we found MRI signals that resemble heartbeat evoked potentials, a form of EEG signals. EEGs measure electrical brain currents, which some people may recognize from personal experience or simply from watching hospital dramas on TV. Electrophysiological potentials like the heartbeat evoked potentials are normally not detectable with MRI, and the scientists believe they could only observe them because the nuclear proton spins in the brain were entangled. So it's through quantum entanglement. And that's where 2 particles are entangled together. And once quantum particles are entangled, even if they're separated from one end of the universe to the other, they will simultaneously affect each other. So much faster, so much more faster than speed of light. It's insane. And it's called, oh man, what is it called? Well, you have quantum entanglement. Trying to remember the exact name of it, and I cannot remember exactly what it's called now. The process of moving faster than that, I can't remember exactly. But anyways, Einstein was talking about how he called it. I think he called it the ghost particle, or the ghost effect, or something of that sort. He was saying that something that could move faster than the speed of light was impossible. And so he thought that to be absurd, but at the same time, it has been observed time and time again. So irregardless of distance, they affect each other simultaneously because they have been entangled and connected together, and they can be inseparable at that point, which also implies the idea that our universe may be simulated, a simulated reality in and of itself, because the everything that would imply that the whole universe is interconnected in a giant web of particles, and everything affects each other, and it's just mind-boggling, to say the least. But okay, so just as we finish up here, because we're an hour and a half, so as we finish up here. Oh, boy. So back onto the IQ, understanding IQ. I'll just set the slide. Actually, I'll just go ahead and put, since we're kind of done with the slides here, we'll go ahead and that did not help. So IQ, as I said, has a certain discriminatory element to it. People do not prefer to talk about whether on the right or left political spectrum. I would say they do not care to talk about it because it has a certain discrepancy against particular people, especially on the lower end of the spectrum. And the conservatives believe that, well, if people just work hard enough, they'll end up being good enough, and that's not actually true at all. If people are low enough IQ, no matter how hard they work, they're never going to be able to be in comparable league as other people of higher IQ. It's just not going to happen. And there's some that literally, like I said before, on 85 or lower on the scale, there is pretty much detrimental. They can literally do little to nothing as far as being productive in society. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult, and technology is making that discrepancy larger among among those within that group, because well, an example was, let's say as simple as people that are sweeping the street in a city and they pick up trash and stuff. Well, now you have tech tech systems that are doing that. People that are driving these things around that are sucking up trash and sweeping up the sidewalks and things of that nature. Somebody that was able to do it by hand before, that had a low enough IQ, they could accomplish that. But now driving a system around without running things over, running people over, they're not capable enough to be able to do something of that. So that job has been taken away, and it's technology advanced, more and more of these jobs are being taken away. I mean, we even see that within these large corporations like Amazon. Packaging personnel are being eliminated and replaced with AI systems. As I said before, even as simple as working at McDonald's is becoming much more difficult, because you have to be at least somewhat tech savvy, and people with lower IQ, but the lower IQ end of the spectrum are not able to comprehend all the various different technological gadgets and things within the screens, and it's actually very complex systems that they're having to work with, and they're not able to accomplish that. So you're eliminating a lot of potential jobs for these individuals, and it's a real situation. And so even on the left end of the spectrum, they believe that, well, everyone is pretty much the same, and if you just go ahead and create enough jobs and create enough different deals and produce enough educational resources, we can improve IQ, and people will, on the lower end, will end up meeting the higher end. And that's not true at all. As I said before, there is no evidence whatsoever, even with Head Start programs, the Head Start program, but preschool educational advancement programs, things of that nature, which was Head Start, have shown little to no improvements at all. They've shown some advancements at early ages, but then what happens is by the time, and that's just because they acquired this knowledge early on, even the higher IQ students that started school later end up about 5th or 6th grade, end up surpassing the lower IQ students that had all the advanced training prior to, and then the differences begin to grow substantially over the course of the lifetime, especially once they get into college, once they get into undergraduate studies and things of that nature. The lower end of the spectrum end up struggling because it's not just comprehension knowledge, it's being able to reason and to use that knowledge creatively and using it usefully, as I was saying there, fluid intelligence, through problem solving. And they're not able to do that nowhere near the level of a higher IQ individual. So it's a real problem. But I would say within the Christian context, if you do it correctly, there is a place that you can put everybody, and especially within personality. I mean, as simple as people that hold the doors or the helping in the child care, or not necessarily child care, but Sunday schools and different things of that nature. There are places and potential that they have, and even not even within those settings, but even as simple as just helping them understand the word better as best as they can, and then having them go do good things, being a part of fundraisers and things of that nature. We can all help each other. Not everyone can be a teacher. Not everybody can, like Paul was saying, there's certain levels of understanding that people harness, and everybody should respect each other accordingly. And that's what is predicated upon on the Christian end of the spectrum, and helping each other. And not everyone is created necessarily equal, but we all have instilled within us the the value of human life. So we are equal in that context at the core of our being. But beyond that, there are discrepancies within talents. Within, there's certain people that can talk really well, that can go up and preach sermons and do all kinds of different stuff that are just truly phenomenal. And I know I could never necessarily do that. I can only teach. I can't find words like they do necessarily. I have to really think about things, and and get more in depth. But then there's things that I can do that they can't necessarily do it. And if we help each other to find our place within the Christian context, not even just within the church itself, within the building, I would say, because there's not a place every single deal, but you can find your place within the ministry aspect of even as simple as helping other people and being a light to the lost world around you in various different ways, and to come up with those ways and to come up with different programs and that can help impact people's lives and help the people that are a part of those programs impact their lives. And so it's really predicated upon IQ and personality, and as well as interest to a certain extent. Not everyone's interested. Not all high IQ people are interested in the same exact things. Everyone has different interests, different things that they enjoy. And, there's people within the motocross industry that have ministries that are touching those people that other people would not touch because they don't have an interest in that. And that's predicated upon personality and interest. And there's a whole bunch of different things. But to think, like I said at the beginning of this, is I've had several different people, especially, even on the older end of the spectrum, I would say, tell me that, well, living a Christian life is just telling others about Christ. And it's like, yeah, that's the basic formulation. Yes, you're correct. That's the basic ground on which you stand. But overall, there's various different means of communicating that to people, and different fields and different settings. And it's much more complex than just the standard. That's the modernization view, I would say. Simplifying it and going, oh yeah, well, it's just straightforward like this, and everybody just be Billy Graham at the end of the day. It's like, it doesn't work that way. Even the text that you believe in doesn't state it's like that. So something to consider. And you put people in the wrong place that don't have the intelligence or personality or interest in that, they're going to fail, and they're going to set them up for failure. The same thing applies in the workplace as well. So anyway, so that's a little study on IQ, the brain, and consciousness. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you would like to support my work, you can. The link's in the description. I plan on trying to do something here next few weeks, sometime or another, 2 or 3 weeks from now or so. Trying to go into personality differences, and a few other things, and try to correlate all of that in. And I try to, of course, keep that central with the Christian text as well. And so and I said before, you have the link to the mushroom oil, as well as a link to Ian McGilchrist's Mastering the Gym series. It's a very interesting book. You can also research that as well. So thank you again for tuning in and for your support. And please like and share. And I hope you have a great evening and stay cool out there. God bless.